fun.
We came to the foremost Saturday, and things are foremost.
I'm working on a house like 2 doors.
Good evening. Welcome to the October 15th City Commission meeting. We'll start with approval of the agenda. The commission reserves the right to amend, supplement, or reorder the agenda during the meeting. Are there any changes that anybody would like to see on the agenda?
I'd move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Nanda. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. On to item B, which is recognitions. The Municipal Services and Operations Department recognition.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Hansen with Black and Beach, but I'm also the chair of the Kansas section AWWA. And I'm here tonight on behalf of AWWA to present the Best Tasting Tap Water Award to the City of Lawrence.
All right. Thought you were going to say beer.
As some of you may or may not be aware, AWWA is American Water Works Association. It's the premier water organization for the things that we do. Has over 50,000 members in the United States. The Kansas section is around 500. And each year at the section level at our conference, which was late August, we have a competition for the different utilities to bring in samples, test the water based on mostly smell and taste. We have a panel of judges, 5 judges total. Dr. Ranke from KU is one of the judges this year, and Lawrence came out on top, so congratulations. And then this award also qualifies the city to participate at the national level in Orlando in June 2020. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And on behalf of treatment staff, we appreciate the award from Kansas chapter of AWWA, and we will continue to provide Lawrence the best tasting water.
Great job. Thank you. We're going to nationals, folks. Hey. Better than KU. Anyway.
I did Dr. Randy's too the other day.
Yeah. So on to item C, consent agenda. Is there anything, let me go ahead and read this. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be acted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Is there anything that the commissioners would like to pull off the agenda? I would like to pull off item C10, E, F, and G. Are there any items that the public would like to have pulled off the agenda for further discussion? All right, can we bring it back up here?
I move we approve the consent agenda minus items C10, E, F, G. Can't read my own writing.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Soden, a second by Commissioner Herbert. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. So item C10E is to receive a recommendation from the Sustainability Advisory Board to, receive recommendation from the Food Policy Council to sign on to the Resilient Kansas Climate and Health Declaration. I believe we have Jasmine.
Jasmine Moore, Sustainability Director for City of Lawrence and Douglas County. Both E and F are directly related. I thought I'd provide just a little bit of context for what this looks like in the City of Lawrence and climate and health. So in the last 30 years, Lawrence has experienced 4 of the 10 hottest summers dating back to 1893, but none of the 10 coolest summers. During heat waves, there were higher average temperatures and higher heat index and hotter nights during these last 30 years. And in the last 30 years, there's been an increase in the number of days with extreme rainfall. The current climate projections for Lawrence in the next 30 years estimate that there will be an increase in severity and frequency of heat waves, and there will be an increase in the amount of excessive rainfall and precipitation. The residents of Lawrence will directly experience the health effects of these extreme weather events, including heat strokes, respiratory disease, and drowning. We also know that the social determinants of health, like access to transportation, safe and affordable housing, economic stability, and education, will also be impacted by extreme heat and flooding, which will have an effect on physical and mental health of the community. As demonstrated by the Health Equity Report published by the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department, there are already severe health inequities in the community, and the populations who experience the most health inequities face disproportionately negative consequences and unequal harms to health due to extreme weather and the cascading effects of climate change. Signing on to this declaration is directly in line with the sustainability goals of both the city and the county, and also in line with the plans for 2020 to develop a climate plan for the city of Lawrence. So the city of Lawrence will be involved in the creation of an updated climate plan in 2020 in partnership with the community. And this plan will address how the community can adapt to the extreme weather changes that we're already experiencing, as well as setting a deliberate course for the future to reduce our community's contribution to climate change. So both the Food Policy Council and the Sustainability Advisory Board have made the recommendation that the City of Lawrence sign on to the Climate and Health Declaration.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Jasmine? Any questions? All right, public comment on this item? Okay, bring it back up here. So I pulled these off along with G just to kind of emphasize the importance of this and the fact that next year we're going to be embarking on a big endeavor to update our climate protection plan. So I think that these two items, as well as joining the Metro Kansas City Climate Action Coalition, is going to be key to joining our regional partners, as well as giving us a broader amount of information that we can pull from to ensure that we, give our climate protection plan the best we can. So I'm really looking forward to this.
I move that we receive the recommendation from the Food Policy Council.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Boley, second by Commissioner Nanda. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. On to item F. Melinda, I'll need you. I need to, let us finish this up, okay?
Okay.
So item F is to receive the recommendation from the Sustainability Advisory Board to the Resilient Kansas Climate and Health Declaration. So Jasmine's talked about that. Do you have any questions on that? Then we'll go ahead and any public comment on that item?
Hi, my name is Michael Steinle. I'm a member of the Sustainability Advisory Board, and I'm the SAB representative to the Food Policy Council, so all these issues are very important to me and to our group and groups in general. I've always considered it an honor to be a member of the Sustainability Advisory Board. I want to kind of let you in on one of the kind of frustration points about being on it. One of the things that we bump up against a lot of times is the fact that there is a limit to what we can do at the grassroots level. This joining the coalition sort of is a nice start to ameliorating that problem. The more we interact with the 9 counties on both sides of the state line, and hopefully counties to the west of us, the more we can create that critical mass of voices that can be heard to make this an issue, not only at the State House, but at the White House. So the climate protection plan that we're going to be endeavoring to modify and update over the course of the next year, along with this potential to join the coalition, are 2 really big steps in creating that critical mass of voices. So I appreciate you considering it and urge that we join the coalition. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, back up to the commission.
I move that we receive the recommendation from the Sustainability Advisory Board.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Boley, second by Commissioner Nanda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Item G, consider joining the Metro Kansas City Climate Action Coalition. Any thoughts on that, Jasmine?
So Jasmine Moore, Sustainability Director. Just a little more context. This coalition started about a year ago and now has over 70 elected officials from both the Missouri and Kansas side of the state line. The purpose is to really join efforts on a regional level. There are a few other communities in the country that are doing this, so we're just one of, I think, 4 that are doing this. So Denver, Washington, D.C., and Chicago, and then the Kansas City area. City of Lawrence was specifically invited because of our leadership on sustainability, and so this is an opportunity to leverage the work that's happening on that regional level, and we're so close that it really fits well. And there's also going to be some technical assistance to the region in looking at regional greenhouse gas inventory, as well as developing a region-wide climate action plan eventually. One of the outcomes that will come from this partnership is that there will be a playbook of potential policy options to advance work on climate change at a local level, and that is anticipated to be ready by the end of December. So by joining this, the City of Lawrence will have access to all those resources.
Thank you, Jasmine. Any questions? All right, thank you. Any public comment on this item?
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Jackie Carroll. I serve as Chair of the Sustainability Advisory Board. Thank you for considering this tonight. Jasmine touched on a lot of the reasons why we think it's important to join the coalition. I will say that seeing the pace at which they have worked, it's been really impressive. I mean, they really banded like earlier this year or last year, and they're already going to have that playbook available by the end of this year. Some of this work is really difficult to get moving quickly, so I think the efficiencies that come from joining a group that's moving this quickly could help our city out a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate it. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, bring it back to the commission. Any thoughts?
Move to approve joining the Metro Kansas City Climate Action Coalition.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Nanda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much for coming on that. On to item E, public comments. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda after first being recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments and questions to the commission. Any general public comment on items that are not on the agenda?
Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm out of order. Very upset because I tried to get here in time to pull an item off the consent agenda that affects me. And I stopped to ask Jeremy a question and apparently came in a few seconds too late. So this is what it looks like when somebody feels like they have to show up on time, in person, to make their statement and their ask. And I missed it by seconds, so I know I can't do it tonight. But I brought everything, but I wish you guys would rethink your policy, because this makes me feel awful that everybody is seeing this. this is what it's like. I haven't come down here so much to fight for my neighborhood. And now I don't get to show you what they're doing tonight. You know who I am.
Any other general public comment on items that are not on the agenda?
We need to give hugs, you know? My name is KT Walsh, and I live at 732 Rhode Island. And I just had a couple of things to bring up. Last Tuesday, you may have read about this, the Ninth Circuit Court on the West Coast ruled that cities cannot make it a crime to sleep on a public street or sidewalk or public property when there aren't enough shelter beds in their community. And it only affects 9 western states, but it'll go to the Supreme Court. And I see this as a wonderful precedent, especially when those of us who were here when the city took bobcats into the woods down here and just took people's possessions and tents with no notice. I just hope now that we don't have the shelter beds that we will show compassion. And the other thing is good news. When the people came to try to spread the word that we need census workers next spring, and we need them really bad, when they met with East Lawrence, we said, drug tests, are there going to be drug tests? This is a federal position. And we finally found out there will be no drug tests. It's a living wage. You can work for the census and smoke weed. That's for you, Chris, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, KT. General public comment? I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers. And now for the next entry in my continuing series on why the city should do away with the ordinance limiting more than 3 unrelated adults from living together in a single-family home. A problem I have with this ordinance is that it's the government deciding who is a family. People who are related, that's who. I don't think that's fair. 4 cousins could live together, but not 4 friends who all grew up together. Also, not 4 elderly friends living without family in a town who have found family in each other. As I've mentioned before, the Golden Girls did an episode about this sort of thing, where Blanche had to sell her home to the other girls so they could say they were property owners and not renters to get around their city's ordinance. However, when it comes to not being recognized as a family, they also did an episode where Rose has a heart attack and then the other girls can't come see her, even though they share their lives with her. So if the Golden Girls taught us anything, it's that you can't always define a family simply by blood relations. Also, I would argue in terms of fairness and equity, this ordinance is unjust when it comes to those with a big family compared to those without. I've known a couple of guys who grew up in the foster system, and neither of them really seemed to have a family. Neither were in touch with their parents, and both bounced around foster families, so it's not like they have a real parent relationship with them when they're adults. Not to mention some of the foster parents are just doing it for the money. So what is someone without family supposed to do if they find themselves homeless? Most likely turn to friends. Some of the arguments against more than 3 unrelated adults living together in a single house are noise and parking problems. But I ask this, do 4 unrelated adults make more noise than 4 related ones? Do the 4 cars owned by 4 unrelated adults somehow take more space than 4 cars owned by 4 related adults? No, but we are willing to make an exception for these problems if the people are related by blood. If 3 siblings are in a house and their cousin suddenly becomes homeless, they can let the cousin move in. Yeah, if someone who grew up in the foster system without family becomes homeless, he can't move in with his friends who he relies on like a family because he's not blood related. So I think this ordinance is not equitable. In order to be equitable, I think it would need to do away with the unrelated part and just set the limit of number of adults living together, regardless of if they are related or not. Or we could just do away with the ordinance altogether. As it is now, the ordinance is more beneficial to people with large families as opposed to those without. And in the bigger scheme of things...
Chris, thank you
I'm
very
sorry.
much.
Thank you.
Any other general public comment on items that are not on the agenda?
My name's William Harmon, and I live in Lawrence, Kansas for about 80 years. And several years ago, they rezoned the people in East Lawrence, made it a one-family addition, and East Lawrence has improved since that happened tremendously. We've had a lot of new houses built in East Lawrence, and East Lawrence is going very good, and I'd hate to see anything go wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other general public comments on items that are not currently on the agenda? All right. We'll move on then to the regular agenda items. Item number 1, consider a text amendment to the City of Lawrence Land Development Code regarding proposed changes to facilitate affordable housing development options and including permitting 2 detached dwellings on 1 plotted lot.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planning Office. This item is related to the text amendment that includes a number of sections of the Land Development Code. To start with, we'd like to just kind of step back a moment and give you some of the milestones that we have worked on with this project. A number of different boards have considered this before the final recommendation has been brought to you tonight. This is simply one text amendment that affects affordable housing. There may be other affordable housing text amendments to consider in the future. Planning Commission held their public hearing in August. The text amendment was presented a final time to AHAB in September, resulting in the final recommendation. The next few slides will cover some of the background work used in preparing the text amendment. The background analysis included conducting a review of the RS zoning districts that would be affected by the proposed text amendment and the extent to which these districts are located, and the areas are shown on the table. This information is also summarized in your packet. I'd ask you to remember that when we're looking at these acreages, the zoning district goes to the center line of public streets, so the actual development area is a little bit smaller. The RS5 district was of a significant discussion, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more. The bulk of that RS5 district is shown in blue, and it's predominantly located on the east side of Iowa Street. There are very few small areas of RS5 located to the west of Iowa Street. The other zoning district I'd like you to make note of is the RS40 district. There are 2 districts that are zoned that designation today. There is one up here in the northwest portion of the community, and then there is a 14-acre piece zoned RS40, which is actually the Raintree Montessori School. For the purposes of our discussion and the analysis that we looked at, we broke the community into the designated neighborhoods. There are a number of informal neighborhoods throughout the community, but this map highlights where those designated neighborhoods are, and you'll see that information throughout the presentation and throughout the communication and packet documents that you have. One of the questions that had also been asked was the location of affordable housing projects. This map shows the location of those projects within the neighborhood context as the overlay district, and it's been noted that a majority of those are located on the east side of Iowa Street as a dividing line. One of the discussions that we had was the price of land throughout the community. This map highlights the assessment of value by neighborhood. Only the land value is calculated in this particular map or represented. The highest values are located in Oried, Old West Lawrence, in downtown area near the university. The lowest values are found in South Lawrence and North Lawrence. One of the other discussions that came up was the question about how many and the lot sizes of the RS5 zoning district. During the Planning Commission, that was a question that was specifically asked about the average lot sizes. That information was not readily available at the public hearing meeting, but it was presented at the AHAB meeting in September. The minimum lot size in the RS5 district is 7,000 square feet, although a majority of these lots actually do exceed that. This map highlights where those lots are located that are both larger and smaller than that 6,000 square foot threshold. That became ultimately a recommendation to the Planning Commission when their recommendation was made to include the RS5 zoning district as being a permissible option for that second dwelling unit, but with the stipulation that the lots meet a minimum area threshold. So the lots that are highlighted in red would not be eligible for this tool if you approve it. As I mentioned, there are a number of pieces of the Land Development Code that are affected by the proposed by the proposed text amendment. Article 2 is the purpose statement. It was staff's intent to bring more alignment between the affordable housing and the RS zoning districts. Article 17 is the definitions section of the code, and that was kind of a housekeeping change to the amendment to bring more clarification, more simplicity to some of those terms and definitions, and to put them in an appropriate grouping within the code for user ease. Table 4 is really Article 4 is really the heart of the proposed text amendment, allowing where that second dwelling unit would be permitted in the district. And then Articles 6 and 5 are the design standards that are associated when a proposed affordable housing project is proposed. A little bit more background in terms of trend. This information was shared with the Planning Commission at their mid-month meeting, just really drawing the attention that other states are addressing affordable housing by removing single-purpose residential zoning districts entirely. This step does not go that far. Just let you absorb that for a moment. And this was just the concluding paragraph in the planning magazine that had that information. This is the table as it looks today in the Land Development Code, where the list of uses are provided along with where they are permitted in the zoning districts. P is something that is permitted by right. S is something that requires a special use permit. The initial recommendation from staff was to allow the second dwelling unit by special use permit as an option in the RS20, RS10, and RS7 districts. Staff did not initially include the RS5 district, although through the public comment, the Planning Commission did forward the recommendation to you that includes that. Oops, sorry. So this slide shows how the code would look with that second dwelling unit permitted. The asterisk directs a reader to go to the sections that contain the design standards. In this particular case, the RS5 district, which is a very specific discussion the Planning Commission had with the public, that the second dwelling unit would be permitted in the RS5 district, subject to the special use permit process, but still meeting those same design standards that are set out in Article 5 and Article 6. The purpose statement, as I mentioned, was also part of the text amendment. This is what it looks like today. This is the existing language that encourages that hierarchy of uses within detached dwellings as an exclusive housing type. The RS districts are currently separated by a minimum lot size requirement that establishes that base density. The proposed language aligns it more with some of the housing policies and encourages more affordable housing. Some of that language is also reflected and borrowed from Plan 2040. Some of the use standards that were identified and recommended and forwarded to this body include that both of those detached dwellings must be affordable, that there is a limit to not more than 2 detached dwellings on a lot. So if there is a lot that is very large, 20,000 square feet, even though it's meeting that minimum threshold area, it's still only allowed to have 2 dwelling units, but it's got to meet those other criteria too. So one of the questions was posed, well, if I have a very large lot, could I put 3 or 4 affordable dwelling units on that lot? No, you cannot, not without going through a subdivision process to subdivide that very large lot, and not more than 2 dwelling units. We reinforce the requirements that the base zoning district's setbacks and dimension standards and off-street parking must be met for the use of this type of tool. This is the density and dimensional standards table in the Land Development Code. The land area or the minimum lot area does not change, but we did add a footnote that addresses the requirements of that minimum lot size as it pertains to the RS5 district. One of the discussions that we had with the Planning Commission was how that density plays out in the development. So we went through an exercise showing what the minimum lot size requirements are for each of those zoning districts. Within the density and dimensional standards, there are certain standards that are already in place that limit or restrict the amount of impervious surface that you can have in a particular zoning district, and then how much building cover that you can have. So these bulk density and dimensional standards still apply to that district, even with that second dwelling unit. So you still have to meet the front yard setback, you still have to meet the side and rear setbacks, and you still have to, or you cannot exceed the maximum building coverage. So just saying that we're going to have 2 single-family dwellings, you actually have to reduce the size of the footprint of those buildings to stay within these thresholds. One of the distinctions we wanted to make with the code and reiterate, so that we're making it very clear that the use of or the placement of a second detached dwelling on a lot is different from the accessory dwelling unit. The accessory dwelling unit is something that in today's language is still prohibited in the RS5 district. Whether or not the commission wants to revisit that in the future, that's a separate piece of all of this. We are still talking about 2 detached dwellings on 1 lot as primary use, not as an accessory. We also mapped for the commission where those accessory dwelling units have been approved so far. It is a little bit surprising, I think, that we don't see more of that use. I don't know the reason why we don't see more use of it. It is a recognized form of affordable housing as an option. Some of the Article 17 changes dealt with some of the new terminology that was needed. What is an affordable dwelling unit? This is a new term into the code. We had to define that for both rental units and for owner-occupied units. And that would be something that would need to be met as part of this project, and it would need to be part of some kind of agreement between the developer and the city if a developer proposes to use this kind of tool moving forward. Some of the other pieces of the Land Development Code in the definitions section, we were relocating accessory dwelling unit, manufactured home, and the residential design. Those are types of detached dwellings or types of residential dwelling. So we collected those all into a similar location, so they're going to be more user-friendly in terms of somebody trying to find and distinguish what those terms are. We did need to make a little bit of a distinction on an attached dwelling and the accessory dwelling. We wanted to make sure that with the accessory dwelling that it's complying with the design standards that are already in place for that. That's already making, that's reinforcing the distinction between what is an accessory dwelling unit and what is this affordable housing element that we're working on. Detached dwellings, this is the existing definitions. It's defined in 2 different ways throughout the code. and we are proposing to combine that into a single cohesive definition that goes along with this. So that was part of the housekeeping housekeeping action that we were taking with this text amendment. Things that don't change with the project or the proposed text amendment is that the RS zoning district has a maximum building height. That would be an expectation to still meet that building height. That off-street parking is required. 2 parking spaces are required per dwelling unit. So if somebody is developing a project with 2 detached dwellings, 4 off-street parking spaces would be required for that project. That's off-street parking, so somewhere on the lot. And then the occupancy standards are not proposed to be modified with this. Not more than 3 unrelated individuals is the current standard. This is not proposed to change. The accessory dwelling unit, you can meet the definition of a family, not more than 3 unrelated plus 1. In the affordable housing element, you have 2 detached dwellings, so you'd have the definition of a family, not more than 3 unrelated, and the definition of a family, not more than 3 unrelated in that house. They're more than likely probably going to be some form of conventional family housekeeping units. Your actions this evening are to either approve the text amendment, revise it as you see fit. You could return it to the Planning Commission for additional discussion. If you're proposing to deny the text amendment, we'd ask that you would give specific direction, but then you would also need to respond to some of the findings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Sandy?
Yeah, I had some questions.
Sure.
Is there a minimum dwelling size?
In the building code, I'm not sure.
Does it have to have
It has to have certain elements in the building to be livable, but there's not, as I understand the latest building code, there's no minimum living bedroom size.
But it has to have at least 1 bedroom, right?
Has to have a bedroom, has to have.
With the height.
Has to have a kitchen, has to have bathroom, those sorts of things.
So a tiny home with a loft is not considered a full dwelling?
It would be with the kitchen, with a kitchen.
If it had a kitchen, but if the ceiling height was below like 7 feet or
No,
whatever the standard
there's
is?
a minimum ceiling height
Mhm.
for all rooms,
Mhm.
livable rooms.
Okay. And then you were talking about the larger lots. I think RS20 was the biggest one.
RS20, the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet. It's very typical in most of our zoning districts that lots exceed the minimum threshold, but yes, there are certainly lots that are at that 20,000, 10,000, 7,000 square foot respectively for those zoning districts.
I was really curious that when you were showing the slide, I guess it might be easier.
I'll pull it back up
for other people. That showed the impervious cover and the building sizes and open space. Yeah, that one. I just found it really interesting that for a larger lot, the 30% building cover, so if you had 2 dwellings on 50% impervious, like just generally how big could those houses be, just as an idea?
That size lot, they could be pretty standard size.
Like 1,100 square feet?
Potentially, yeah.
I'm trying to get an idea in my mind.
Are you talking RS20 or RS5?
Yeah.
20.
RS20.
I also find it really interesting that the open space required becomes larger as the lot goes up. What's the thinking behind that?
I think these RS20, RS40 zoning districts go back to the prior code where we had an estate and we had an RSA, which was an agricultural lot. And those lot configurations and sizes were kind of reflective of a particular design. So estate size, subdivisions were quite large, and then we had the agricultural lots. That was something that was developed, I want to say in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think that came out of a discussion with the North Lawrence neighborhood, looking for truck gardens, something that reflected the character of the neighborhood with kind of these large agricultural, urban kind of lots. So that's where those lot sizes were coming from, I think.
So it's more of a suburban, almost kind of traditional
I think it's
layout.
starting to bridge that, yeah.
Will you go back to the map that had all of the RS zones across the city?
Sure.
And what color is the RS20 there?
The RS20 is this very light orange color.
And then the 40 is the larger,
Is the dark orange.
the dark orange, yeah, thank you.
So those two pieces are the RS40.
And so but we're not looking at RS40, we're just going from RS7 to RS20.
The RS7, 10, and 20, and RS5 really make up the bulk of the residential zoning district in Lawrence.
When builders come forward with subdivision plans, what's kind of the typical RS zone that they ask for?
RS7 is the most prevalent request that we get. We're starting to see more requests and more consideration of RS5 zoning. We saw that in the Langston Heights area to the west.
So you aren't really getting asked much about 10 and 20 then?
Not too often, no.
Interesting. Okay. I was really curious about this because one of the things that has kind of struck me is that the sizes of lots, of course, in the western part of our city are much larger, and that's really what I'm wanting to impact with this amendment.
So some of these subdivisions in this area over the years, they had some fairly significant topography, a lot of steep slopes, so it required a larger lot size just to get a buildable pad site. So that might have been part of what was driving some of those larger lot areas.
Mm-hmm. I just want to make sure the one thing that concerns me is that, you know, we already have a large part of our city that's very dense, and it's not so much that I'm looking to make that area more dense on one layer, but instead spreading out into the rest of the city, the allowable density that can be there. So I don't know if there's any way to really encourage it to proliferate, I guess you might say, through the rest of the city rather than, you know, making really dense areas more denser.
Commissioner, I would interject that that was a discussion topic at both Planning Commission and Affordable Housing Board, and the method chosen by the Planning Commission was to create that special use permit for the RS5 and leave it as a permitted use and everything above that, so that it was, you know, a little bit easier, quicker to go onto an RS7 zoned piece of property and come into the city and get your building permits, get the agreement set up, and then go build your 2 units. So that was the method that was created for your review, to do that, to do just that.
Did you consider the possibility that much of this area is covered by restrictive covenants that would obviate this whole thing?
We haven't talked much about that, and we don't, as you know, we don't have those covenants in our office. They're private covenants that the city doesn't apply. But it's a good point, Commissioner Bowley, that private covenants may prevent these in certain instances.
Could we go, Cindy, could we go back to that slide that showed the average and the medium lot size for?
I think that was just for the RS5 district.
RS5, yeah, you had a table.
Oh, no, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, no.
Yeah.
There you go.
So I'm curious as to if the RS5 is typically the 5 to 7, is there a reason why the average square foot of a RS5 is 7466, why it wouldn't be an RS7, since it goes way above that?
I don't think we dug real hard into why these numbers are the way they are. I think some of this RS5 lot size may be driven up a little bit by the addition of the RS5 zoning that we have that got added into the Fairfield Farms subdivision. I think there's about 38 lots in there that are zoned RS5. Some of them are quite large. They did, in that particular project, what they did was rezoned a cohesive area, connected area, but only some of those lots are at that 5,000 square foot. So I think it's that kind of thing. I think Langston Heights has a little bit of that. I think that may be more what's driving up some of those lot sizes. When I looked at the map, though, this is the Fairfield Farms, where you have quite a large lot. These generally are far exceeding that minimum lot size. In this neighborhood here, I think this is some of Oried. I'm not sure exactly where some of those boundaries are. And then some of this area down here. I don't know, I don't have a good answer why I think that's happening in these locations. I think these that are red are more reflective of those original town site plats that were 50 feet wide. These, I think, probably came a little bit later and have a mix of things.
Okay. So was there discussion at the Planning Commission about the possibility of these larger, like the RS20s, allowing more than 2 houses?
That's a subdivision?
We have really, yeah, and I think that was really our discussion, was that's really about subdividing the property into different lots, because you are still wanting to maintain some context of that base neighborhood. Just slipping in on an RS20 lot, 4 or 6 buildings in there, that may have a different kind of impact on the neighborhood. But if you subdivide that lot, make sure each of those has proper frontage, and then restricting this to not more than 2 detached dwellings on a lot, that kind of falls in line with what we're already permitting with the accessory dwelling unit. So trying to keep some parity there, trying to maintain some neighborhood character within the context of the text amendment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for?
Yeah, this is just a clarification. I know you covered it, and I promise you I was listening. I think it's an important enough piece that I want to make sure it gets reiterated on the record. But will you again cover, with this text amendment, is there any change to the amount of impervious space allowable or the amount of building cover allowable?
There is not.
Thank you.
I was curious, do you see frontage requirements really restricting where this can be done at?
Depending on the lot context, yes, it could have a very significant impact.
Because even though we have, that big map of all the RS7, I mean, practically speaking, where is that really going to be allowed at? Is it allowed on an alley, or does it have to be the street frontage?
It could be a combination of street access and alley access, but it's also, we're anticipating a lot of shared driveways and using that approach to get the vehicles back.
I just hate to create something that turn around and no one can use it, because I want it to be used.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Any more questions? Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. So we'll open up to public comment at this time. Just to remind folks, there's 3 minutes, little time limit on public comment.
Good evening, Mayor Larson and members of the Commission. My name is Ron Gacious, and I'm here on behalf of the City's Affordable Housing Advisory Board. The text amendment that you have before you is a collaborative effort between the Planning Commission and the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and our advisory board endorsed it without objection. unanimously. We would like to see this become policy for the city of Lawrence. It would be the first new affordable housing tool put in place by the city since the Affordable Housing Toolbox was first published about 1.5 years ago. Number of questions have been raised of staff, which I think are excellent, regarding where this might be used, how it might be used. I don't think that we will have widespread application of this tool, certainly not in the older sections of our community, certainly not in East Lawrence. I think there have been some great compromises struck and some protections put in place to protect the older parts of our community that have the smallest lots from this type of density intrusion. And I'm very hopeful that some of the larger lots that are west of Iowa will become the best targets for this type of development, where a developer in one of our current suburban neighborhoods will see the opportunity to place two $250,000 homes in one lot where he might previously have placed a $350,000 or $400,000 home. It is consistent with the Plan 2040 that you've recently adopted. It does demonstrate a very effective density tool to make use of current available lots, current infill opportunities, rather than to continue to invest in extension of our infrastructure to the perimeter of our city. I would welcome opportunity to respond to any questions, but I urge your adoption of this text amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Other public comments on this item?
Good evening, Mayor Larson and everyone on the City Commission. My name is Jesse Brinson. I'm the president of the Brook Creek Neighborhood Association. We request that if or when you adopt a density bonus, you implement it according to the professional planning staff recommendation that would allow 2 detached dwellings on one lot in the RS7, RS10, or RS20 district with approval by a special permit. Thank you, Planning Commission and AHAB, for hearing our concerns that allowed a density bonus in RS5 zoning, meaning that low-income housing will continue to cluster on the east side of the town where 95% of RS5's zoning exists. This is in conflict with the city policy of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which says affordable housing should be scattered throughout the community. Clustering is also detrimental to the low-income residents themselves, the social economic principle that is the basis of that policy. There were some restrictions put in play, but that August 28th choice was ill-informed. As a result, the Planning Commission tried to restrict 2 houses per lot from occurring on the east side with a disincentive of a special use permit for RS5's lots and restricting 2 houses from lots smaller than 6,000 square feet. The staff did not have the requested information of how many or how few RS5 lots are larger or smaller than 6,000 square feet. The Planning Commission discovered a month later at their September meeting that only 1/3 of those RS5 lots are off limits, and that's what you see here in this map. Looking at this map on the other side, which is predominantly the Brook Creek neighborhood, the RS5 lots are smaller than 6,000 square feet. Here constitute only 16%, meaning that 83% of our RS5 lots are eligible for 2 houses in Brook Creek. Add that to the RS7 lots, which are eligible by right, and virtually 95% of Brook Creek that would be more attractive for the double density. With the lower price of our lots and the fees of $725 for the special use permit, it would make Brook Creek more of a target for building. We request that if or when you adopt a density bonus, you implement it according to the professional planning staff recommendation that would allow 2 detached dwellings on a RS7 RS-10 or RS-20 district with approval by a special use permit. By so doing, the predominantly east side RS-5 lots will be off limits, and a special use permit would allow the exercise of property rights relative to our RS-7 lots, preserving our ability to have a say in land use impact on our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse.
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers, and I support this. I think more could be done with it, but I've been here at like the past few weeks just saying since for you guys to find a way to increase population density since because of master plan, I guess 2040, and I think this goes along well with the Plan 2040, and I just want to say I thank the city that they are actually trying to increase population density, and I'm going to lay off on calling for more, like for the city to find more population density ways to happen till I guess the next commission, but thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name's Leah Roseland. I don't have any formal comments prepared. I just really wanted to speak from a personal perspective. I live in the Brook Creek neighborhood. Unfortunately, I have not been able to attend any of the Brook Creek Neighborhood Association meetings because they're not accessible at a time for people with young children. But I do want to let the commission know that by no means is the neighborhood or even the neighborhood association unanimous. Amongst my neighbors, there's a lot of discussion and in fact support. This issue came up for me when I moved back to Lawrence after getting a divorce and my income was cut in half. I suddenly found myself in a position of not being able to afford to live in my hometown. I work at a nonprofit and I'm a single mom. And thanks to Tenants to Homeowners, I am now in affordable, sustainable housing. There are people like me all over our neighborhood. There are social workers and police officers and nurses and people that keep our community safe. One of those people that needs affordable housing is my mother. She's really struggling right now, and she's a social worker, and it's going to get worse when she retires. As a single mother, it would be amazing to have a multifamily lot where my daughter and I could live, and my mother could retire right behind us, and we could support each other. This is done in a lot of communities all over the United States and culturally all over the world. Something that I want to urge the commission to consider is the people need houses. We don't have enough affordable houses in our community. We literally are not building enough affordable housing stock to meet the demand that is needed. When I look at the signs saying no to double density in these huge empty lots that are sitting there that could easily fit a house where children could grow up and families could be stable, the value of people having a safe, permanent place to live is the priority for me, and I hope for the commission. So I really urge you to think about the human value, about people that need to retire and the children that need affordable, safe places to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Good evening, Mayor Larson and Commissioners. I'm Mike Myers. I reside at 1312 New Hampshire in East Lawrence and have for about 27 years. I just wanted to speak briefly about some of the fear, I guess, I think there may be around the idea of affordable housing coming into your neighborhood. Probably 12 years ago or so, there was a big strip of East Lawrence on Rhode Island Street near my house that had no houses on it because the county wanted to put a parking lot there. And I wasn't really paying attention at that time to what was going on in the development community, but all of a sudden up pops up probably, I think it's 4 or 5, 4 duplexes and a restored probably 1900 vintage house that popped up where there had been a parking lot, or a proposed parking lot, and in my neighborhood. And I was so excited about that. I found out who built it, and it turned out it was tenants to homeowners. And now, you know, I've been on their board now for probably a decade, and I can tell you that the stuff that tenants to homeowners builds is super high quality, 4-sided architecture. I mean, it's better quality stuff than you'll see in new subdivisions because we're using, you know, proper lap siding on all sides of the house instead of switching to cheap materials on the back. They're super energy efficient. And frankly, you know, as a parent in a neighborhood where there have been gaps, it's pretty fantastic to see nice, high-quality buildings being put in and families and people coming back to the neighborhoods. So as far as density goes, I'm all for it in my neighborhood. Bring it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Other public comment on this item?
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Commissioners. Ted Boyle, North Lawrence Improvement. I've heard a lot of rhetoric up here, but I haven't heard anything about stormwater or flooding. North Lawrence, you know, our density, I can remember probably 15 years ago when RS5 zoning came in and we were forced, kind of blackmailed into accepting that RS5 because told the property owners they'd have to go through a lot of red tape to rebuild their homes if they didn't, if we didn't concur with the RS5 zoning. So we did, and then we lost some big houses, big lots. Developers bought them, put instead of one nice house on there, there's 4 or 5 houses on there, and it's RS5. And I'll tell you, they're over on 3rd and Perry Street. There's a row of them there, and the lot's very just minimal. 5,000 square feet. So the flooding that we've had in North Lawrence in the 90s, the city and staff and the Planning Commission said, oh, let's build houses in a flood-prone area. And they decided to build the houses on a mound, anywhere from 3 feet to 5 feet tall, with the established residents on each side. You can go over North Lawrence right now and see those houses there. And what they do, they flooded everybody out around them. The city come over and said, we'll take care of it, dig the ditches deeper, wider, and longer to nowhere, just a retention pond. Well then, in '08, passed the sales tax, and we're going to get a $7 million pump. Well, we finally got that $7 million pump 10 years later after we started petitioning about it in 1995. After the 93 flood in North Lawrence. That was a stormwater. And so we've got this pump now, but it's less than half functional because can't get the water to the pump because the city is reluctant to spend enough stormwater money in North Lawrence to do that. And prior to getting that pump, we did 20 years of that development on those hills and flooding out residents along Lincoln, Perry Street, Lyon Street. For 20 years that we put up with that. City bought several properties over there. So now you want to double density the thing and start it all over again. And last night at our neighborhood meeting, we were asked, residents asked me, does the city have another $7 million for another pump? And today, that pump, instead of $6.6 million back 5 years ago, would probably cost $12 million, $15 million today. The underpass. underpass flooded.
Thank you, Ted.
7 times in 8 months.
Thank
And
you,
it
Ted.
took us 8 months to get the new pumps in it. Oh, and lots over there are 25,000 to 35,000 apiece.
Is this on? Hi, I'm Bob Rummel. Oh, let me get. I'm going to read something. I'm Bob Rummel. I live in Brook Creek neighborhood. Affordable housing, what a wonderful phrase. Who doesn't want to support that? A noble vision, and you're hearing from Tenants to Homeowners, Inc., and their employees and their choir about how wonderfully noble it is and how noble they are. However, the business of affordable housing falls to economics. Land must be bought, houses built and sold. Right now, the only lots being bought by affordable housing are the small and inexpensive RS5 lots of 5,000 square feet. RS5 lots make up 12% of the city, and that's all east of Iowa Street. And of those, the cheapest ones are east of Massachusetts Street. These are the only lots being bought by affordable housing, and it's why affordable housing is clustered in 3 low-income neighborhoods east of Massachusetts. And here's a grid of it. To give you some color, in my neighborhood, Brook Creek, within a block of where I live, there are 20 tenants to homeowners dwellings and 0 in all of West Lawrence. If RS5 is removed from consideration, this uneven distribution will stop, and these small but affordable single-family home lots will remain available for people and not gobbled up by tenants to homeowners to build their more expensive affordable housing on top. There remains real and practical issues against this text amendment that would allow 2 3-story houses to be built on a small RS5 lot while taking away the neighborhood's right to say no. More infrastructure, roads, sewer, etc., more schools, more storm water runoff, more domestic disputes, more parking, more dogs, less gardens, less trees, etc. For all these reasons, I recommend you reject this proposal in its entirety, or at the very least, remove RS5 lot from consideration.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, members of the City Commission. Thank you for your time tonight. My name is Julie Denning. I have 3 properties in the Brook Creek area, and I am a business owner here in Lawrence for 17 years. I like my neighborhood. That's why I have invested in it. What I don't like is the reinvention of the trailer park by tenants to homeowners selling their houses as affordable, in which the tenants never actually own the land. They're leasing the house that is artificially priced, and when that person is ready to sell the house, their property value has not increased like their neighbors on traditional lots. Their only choice is to sell back to tenants to homeowners, in which 75% of that profit goes back to the company. The double density is devaluing our neighborhood, and the most affordable lots in town are being snatched up by a company posing to provide affordable housing, when in fact they are devaluing the poorest neighborhoods at the profit from those who are in the most financial hardships. I ask that you would please consider taking the RS5 off of the text amendment so that tenants to homeowners will be forced to invest in RS7 and RS10 neighborhoods and stop the uneven distribution and protect the Brook Creek neighborhood from gentrification And I would like to resonate with what Ted Boyle said, and that the most recent house that was built adjacent to my 1305 Oak Hill property is on one of the mounds, and that the water is already affecting my property, and we've had to spend thousands to correct it. So my investments are directly being affected by the profits that this company is hoping to gain. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Julie. Other public comment?
My name is Rebecca Buford. I'm the Executive Director of Tenants to Homeowners. And I wanted to speak to a little bit about, let's talk about mathematics. I would urge you to vote for this because it will be the tool to get us in all the neighborhoods in town. I completely agree that we need to have available opportunities on the west side and throughout every neighborhood. One of the reasons we are primarily on the east side, although we do have 7 or 8 units on the west side, unlike what was just spoken about, but primarily on the east side is because the lots are 35 to 40,000, and lots on the west side can be 75 to 80,000. So if we do our math and we're able to build 2 units per lot with this affordable housing bonus, we can then get to that price range of 35 to 40,000 per lot per unit. So my issue is I want to have more units at the same price point or the same subsidy requirements. What a lot of the neighbors are not thinking about is we also have a lot of seniors and single people that need affordable housing at $100,000 and lower. If we start at a $50,000 lot, I can barely build a house for $50,000 and keep it affordable for them. So one of the thoughts is we have a $30,000 lot and we split that with 2 little houses, small houses, same impervious coverage as one big house with 2-car garage and a double driveway, and you split that into 2 little 600 square foot houses instead of a 1,200 square foot house, and you have 2 little drives, same impervious coverage, same water non-issues, same parking requirements. All of those things work. We just serve 2 families instead of 1. It's very simple mathematics that does not increase density in a way where we're adding more impervious coverage to neighborhoods. But we do need those RS5 opportunities to get to a price point for Leah and for her mom. A lot of seniors that need to have small houses, they don't need a 3-bedroom house. They need a 1 or 2-bedroom unit of 600, 700 square feet. And this is more green, more sustainable, and new construction owner occupied. I have yet to be told why that could hurt Brook Creek neighborhood. The other thing to understand is homes in trust that do allow 25% of equity to the individual homeowners, even though they're living in a house $50,000 less. They also are not comparable on the market with, so we do not affect appreciation or depreciation on other neighbors up or down. So it's really important. We're creating a secondary
Thank you,
market of
Rebecca.
affordable units.
Thank you.
Please vote for this. Thank you.
Other public comment on this item? Okay, we'll bring it back up to the commission. Thoughts?
Well, before we get started on discussion, I want to disclose, and I checked with our general counsel to make sure that there wasn't a conflict. I own a home with a mother-in-law unit, which is a 1-bedroom home, behind it on an RS5 lot. And so I want to fully disclose that I'm impacted by this decision, but that I may not be, 1. And 2, while that is a reality, I'm really looking at the broader picture of affordable housing in our community as we talk about this. So I wasn't required to disclose that, but I think that I should, 1, and we live in a small enough town that that would be a conversation potentially anyway.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thoughts?
I'll start, I guess. I brought this up in questioning, and obviously this was a big piece for me, was looking at the stormwater issue and looking at the environmental impact of this. And a lot of that concern went away when it's been reiterated to me multiple times from multiple people, and then here again tonight twice. With adoption of this policy, the impervious surface standards that we have in our code are not changing. The building cover standards that we have in our code are not changing. The maximum building height standards that we have in our code are not changing. So if I park one house on an RS5, RS7, RS10, whatever, I can currently, with or without this policy, cover the same amount of ground with the same amount of building cover as with this policy. And that to me is a huge relief for me, that I do not believe this policy is going to have the detrimental effect on impervious surface that some have claimed it will. I do also want to say that throughout this process, I've been a little disheartened, would be, I suppose, the way I'd phrase it, by some of the language that's been tossed around by those speaking against this. I take major issue with the way that people have been characterized who occupy these homes. This has been presented as though individuals who live in tenants to homeowners properties, or whatever other properties may become users of this code, as though they are somehow a lesser part of our population. I mean, these are our neighbors, and I take real issue with the way in which this has been spoken to. And so tonight I plan on supporting it. I plan on actually making use of a tool to impact affordable housing. For the longest time, I think Ron Gacious mentioned this is the first time we've actually looked at using a new tool in a year and a half. Up to this point, affordable housing has been a talking point. It's been a way to get yourself elected. It hasn't actually had impact. This gives us the opportunity to actually utilize a new tool, a new approach, to actually see the change that we talk about saying we promote. And so, I'm going to support it because it's our first chance to actually stand behind what we've said we believe in.
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate your points, especially on the impervious surface. I appreciate the work you did to follow up on that. This is a tool that fits with the Plan 2040 that we just adopted. We need tools like this to increase the density of our footprint for sustainability reasons, and also to support the efforts of those who are trying to bring affordable housing to our community. So I'm going to support this.
I think that you're right, Matthew, about the impervious surface piece, and I do also appreciate your looking into that. I think that we can acknowledge that the weather patterns that we've been experiencing have indicated to us that we need to look at our stormwater issues anyway, but I don't think they're related to this, in that those density levels won't be impacted as far as impervious surfaces go. I think that having an SUP for RS5 is reasonable as well, considering the density of those lots in specific areas of our community. And I don't think that it would be necessary, so I agree not to have them in the 7, 10, and 20, simply because any neighborhood is going to oppose these at some point to some degree, much like we ran into with Airbnb. Once that comes to your neighborhood, then that becomes a different question. And I think it's appropriate to make it permissible for the 7, 10, and 20. I think that this will be a real impact on affordable housing, or at least an attempt at impact on affordable housing. It's not just tenants to homeowners who can take advantage of this opportunity, and hopefully others will see the opportunity that presents. I think that we've made it clear, the Planning Commission has made it clear, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has made it clear that the intention is to disperse these communities throughout Lawrence, or these residential areas throughout Lawrence. And I do plan to see some intention around that as we move forward with this. So I support it as it's written with the SUP for RS5 and not for 7, 10, and 20.
So I'm very optimistic for the success of it, but I'd prefer to perhaps maybe ease into the process, perhaps having a special use permit for 7 and permitted in 10 and 20. I'm kind of interested, even though I know this isn't something that's going to happen in the next month, that when people annex land into the city, that 10 and 20 lots aren't even allowed anymore. I think we need to be a little serious about that. But I think that it should be a special use permit for RS7, and I'm not ready to extend it to RS5. I think we should get some successes under our belt first, and then perhaps the future commission can look to expand if they choose to.
Any thoughts on that? Wanting that, something like that?
You know, this has been in process for a year. You could say we've eased into it that way.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, and this is something that, again, we've been working on for a long time. Since I've been on the commission in 2015, this commission, which most of us were here except for Jennifer, have been talking about affordable housing and the desire to make sure we have it scattered across our community. It's been a difficult row to go through. And we've worked really hard. The Affordable Housing Advisory Board has been working very hard on this. And so I feel like this is finally a pathway to getting that housing on the west side of town. We just have not had this type of a tool before. And the fact is, lots are much more expensive in West Lawrence. That's just a fact. In some way, we've got to reduce those prices. And I think this is the best tool I've seen yet to do that. So I'm very excited about this and what we're going to see in the future. And I've said it before, we've just got to start having more on the west side. And I know the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has been working really hard on it. So I'm going to support this. I think it's a really good step forward for our affordable housing problem.
So I have questions for staff here.
Sure.
So the staff memo has 2 questions on it. Does the RS5 zoning, is it already included in the ordinance as written
Yes.
Yes.
for permitted?
Yes, it's the Planning Commission's recommendation that the ordinances contain.
So 5, 7, 10, and 20 are all permitted by
Correct.
right?
RS5 with a special use permit, the others by right.
Got it.
I do want to talk about just a minute about the stormwater because I agree with Matthew on that. But I also want to point out the stormwater issues that we've been having. Obviously, everybody knows about the rains we've had the past few years and how difficult they've made it. But I also think our stormwater situation is a structural problem that staff I know is very well aware of, and they've been working on that. We're behind in making sure our infrastructure is up to par on handling some of these rains. And we always won't be able to handle it all because I think it's going to continue to get worse. But we've got to start investing more in our stormwater system, and we've been short on that for many years.
So just to understand the direction, am I the only one that wants RS7 to be special use permit?
That's what I see.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'll go ahead and vote since I'm not going to get anywhere with that. But I'll vote in favor of it then.
Okay. Thank you.
I would make a motion then I would move we approve text amendment TA 18-00467 to the City of Lawrence Code regarding proposed changes to multiple chapters of the City Code to facilitate affordable housing development options, including permitting 2 detached dwellings on 1 platted lot, and adopt on first reading ordinance number 9721, ordinance number 9727, 9728, 9729, and 9730, based on the findings presented in the staff report.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Soden. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Want a break? Let's take about 10-minute break, please. All right, we're ready to come back. We're on to item 2 of the regular agenda, receive presentation from the Lawrence chapter of the NAACP regarding its work with the Equal Justice Initiative for a historical marker with information about a lynching that occurred in Lawrence in 1882.
Good evening, Mayor, City Manager, and City Commissioners. My name is Ursula Miner. I'm President of the Lawrence Branch NAACP. The mission of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is to secure political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health and well-being of all persons. In February 2019, our branch had a strategic planning session to discuss the vote and key projects that we will work on for the year. The work of the NAACP is done through standing committees. We chose 3 areas to work on: community coordination, education, and history. The History Committee is working on a project that involves an important part of Lawrence's history that has been left in the past. The work of the NAACP History Committee is working on a project. This project will need community support as there's many milestones to complete, and we can't complete them without the community. The mission of the Lawrence Douglas County NAACP History Committee is to develop and disseminate a more just, historically accurate narrative of the history of racial relations in our area, to continue the community's efforts to address current racial issues and facilitate reconciliation. The History Committee Chair is Carrie Altenburn, along with a subcommittee and a full committee. I would like the members of the History Committee and any NAACP members to stand for a moment. The History Committee has done a fabulous job on moving this project forward. Carrie Altenburn will now go over the project and what it entails.
Good evening, Commissioners. Not long after midnight.
Could you state your name, please?
Excuse me, Carrie Altenburn, sorry. Not long after midnight on the morning of June 10th, 1882, a large mob of Lawrence citizens descended on the Douglas County Jail. Locked up in the jail were 3 black men, Isaac King, George Robertson, and Pete Vinegar. King and Robertson were charged with the murder of a white man, but Pete Vinegar was not charged with anything. The mob broke into the jail and pulled King, Robertson, and Vinegar from their cells and dragged them to the center of the Kansas River Bridge. The 3 men had nooses put around their necks. The other ends of the ropes were tied to the bridge's iron trusses, and the men were dropped from the bridge to hang. Their lifeless bodies were left to hang there until daylight came, when they were taken down and eventually buried in unmarked graves in Potter's Field in Oak Hill Cemetery. On April 26, 2018, the Equal Justice Initiative opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. The memorial is composed of over 800 hanging columns, one for each of the counties in the United States where a racial terror lynching occurred between 1877 and 1950. The names of the lynched in each of those counties are etched into their county's columns. Douglas County is represented by one of these columns. On the grounds outside the memorial building lie duplicate copies of each of the etched columns. The EJI is developing a program where local communities will soon be able to claim their county's monument and have it shipped at no charge to their county to be installed there. The EJI has another program already in operation to create metal 2-sided history markers that can be requested by local communities to be placed at the site of lynchings. Once approved by the EJI, they have the markers produced and shipped at no cost to the communities for installation there. A third program of the EJI is the collection of soil from the site of lynchings to be kept in glass jars, one for each lynching victim, with the name of the victim recorded on the jar, to be kept by local communities are sent to the EJI's Legacy Museum, also in Montgomery. Excuse me. The EJI requires that community remembrance project coalitions be formed in each of these counties where the terror lynchings occurred to serve as the official body representing markers and monuments, requesting markers and monuments, organize their local activities, work with the EJI to cooperatively write the text for markers, and to request monuments when they become available. Community Remembrance Project coalitions complete the historical marker proposal, review the conduct and research about county lynching victims, craft the marker language with the EJI, identify sites for installation, secure necessary permits and approval, plan a history marker dedication and unveiling ceremony, hold a high school racial justice and essay contest, and install markers and hold dedication and unveiling ceremonies. Coalition members commit to authenticity. Prioritize the voices of those closest to the individuals being memorialized. Forthrightness. Share any information that is relevant to the work. Collaboration. Your strengths become mine and mine becomes yours. Listening with respect. Pay attention to what is and is not being said. And empowered courtesy. Consistently act and speak from a place of goodwill towards others. Coalition members assist with connecting community remembrance projects to pre-existing or broader community concerns, planning a culturally relevant dedication and unveiling ceremony, promoting a public high school essay scholarship competition, inviting community members to the dedication and unveiling ceremony, and inviting journalists and press to the ceremony and events. Local action. We do have had some local action. Activities in 2008. Before the National Memorial for Peace and Justice was opened, I saw it on Facebook that this was going to happen. So I contacted the EJI to find out what the requirements would be. Unbeknownst to me, several other members of the community were also doing that very same thing at the very same time, but we didn't know it. And we think each of us went our individual ways through 2008. In 2019, excuse me, we got together under the Lawrence NAACP History Committee banner. We organized at the February 2nd goal-setting session that the NAACP had, and then we created the Marker and Monument Subcommittee to work directly on the project. We are organizing the Lawrence Douglas County Community Remembrance Project Coalition to work towards getting a historical marker created for the 1882 lynchings and to bring it and our monument here. Current members of the coalition, the Langston Hughes Center, Douglas County Historical Society, Friends of Oak Hill Cemetery, the Blackjack Battlefield Trust, St. Luke AME Church, the Lawrence Public Library, and the Lawrence branch of the NAACP. Potential additional members of the coalition are school districts, USD 497, 348, 491, private and religious schools, churches and other religious organizations, businesses, service organizations, city and county governments, universities, KU, Haskell, Baker, libraries, historical societies, and other entities to ensure broad-based public involvement and support. Known and potential expenses and responsible parties. The creation of the marker and the monument. The EJI pays for that entirely. Shipping of the marker and the monument. Likewise, the EJI takes full monetary responsibility for that. Installation of marker and monument. The actual cost is unknown, but it's probably less than $1,000 for each one. That's the responsibility of a local coalition. The cash award for the essay contest winner is supplied by the EJI. Events leading up to the dedication ceremony, events following dedication are all the local coalition's responsibility. and other community events, activities, including public discussions and education and soil samples, are responsible of various entities that will participate in this. We have come up with four sites that we think would be the best potential sites to install the markers and the monument, the marker and the monument. I will go through them in descending order. City Hall, of course, owned by the city. You've probably seen this picture before. Here's another view. We start to swing around the west side of City Hall. Now we're on the west side of City Hall. That arrow is pointing at something through the trees there. This is the view down that arrow. This is not a stone wall. This is a stone pier, the only remaining part of that original bridge that the three men were lynched from. And it is in full view of the City Hall site. Here's another view of the bridge. And you can see from here, by looking down the bridge, you can see exactly where that bridge was originally. This map shows that that oval there is approximately where the City Hall site is for the monument. And that is the pier, the stone pier. We come up with the pros and cons of each of the four sites. Pros for this site is, of course, the stone pier is visible from it. Victims were dragged across this site on their way to lynching. The site has substantial bicycle and foot traffic crossing the bridge and going up and down Massachusetts Street and on 6th Street. Site's visible to people using City Hall. Site is under consideration for including on the Lawrence Loop Trail. A marker on the site would be easily visible on both sides. There is ample parking at the Riverfront Mall, across 6th Street and on Massachusetts Street, and the pedestrian crosswalk across 6th Street is an on-demand signal. We really couldn't come up with any cons. Second site is the downtown Welcome Plaza, also owned by the city. This is the Welcome Plaza in relationship to the pier. The pros for this site, both current bridges are visible from the site. It's easily available from 6th Street, and there is parking for the site along Massachusetts and Vermont. There are cons, however. You cannot see the stone pier from the plot. There is little current foot and bicycle traffic there, and the view of the river from the site is very limited. Robinson Park, which is owned by Douglas County. This is approximately where the jail once was. Part of it's probably under where Vermont Street is now. The rest is in that western part of Robinson Park. This is the park's relationship to the pier, the stone pier. The pros for this site. You can see both bridges visible from the site. It is the site where the Douglas County Jail was, where the victims were taken by the mob. They were dragged through this site on their way to be lynched. It is a site of a historic cannon and the Shunganunga boulder. The site is a peaceful location to sit and reflect. There is good landscaping with benches, and the site is under consideration to be on the Lawrence Loop Trail. Cons, again, you cannot see the stone pier from Robinson Park. There is no parking near to the site. The pedestrian crosswalks to get to Robinson Park are not on demand, so that makes access to the site somewhat difficult. Constant Park is our fourth possibility, also owned by the city. That's about as close as you can get to the bridge. Everything in front of there is floodplain, and nothing can be put in the floodplain. So no markers could be put down in the floodplain, no matter how good the siding was down there, which it really isn't that great. Here's a relationship to Constant Park, and once again, to the pier. The pros is there is a small parking lot already on the site, and there is parking along Tennessee Street. There's an existing foot and bicycle trail through the site. It's located close to 2 historical markers. The current Vermont Street Bridge is visible from the site, and it is also under consideration for being on the Lawrence Loop Trail. Cons, once again, you cannot see the stone pier from that site. Nowhere on the site is it visible. The view of the current bridge from the site is partially obstructed, somewhat by vegetation, but also by buildings. Location on the site is limited, as I said, due to the floodplain requirements, and it is the farthest site from the victim's route and the lynching location. So taking all the pros and cons into each of the 4 proposed sites, the overall and best appropriate site for the installation seems to be the City Hall site. This will likely be the site that we recommend when the time comes to make the official designation for where the marker and monument are to be installed. We are requesting that the City Commission consider having the city officially join the Lawrence Douglas County Community Remembrance Project Coalition. Future. We will be back at a future meeting to update the City Commission on the progress of this very important project. And depending on which site is eventually chosen to be the site of the marker and monument, we will potentially come back to this City Commission to request approval for the installation site. And finally, justice. Isaac King, George Robertson, and Pete Vinegar did not receive justice in 1882. They also have not received justice in the 137 years that have elapsed since they were lynched from the Kansas River Bridge. To paraphrase the famous quote attributed to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., our intent is to help bend the long arc of the moral universe a little bit more towards justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions? For Terry? So we have no questions up here, so let's open it up to public comment. Any public comment on this item? Okay, bring it back up to the commission.
Okay, I'd like to just let everybody know that I am actually on the NAACP History Committee, and I'm really glad to see my fellow members of my committee come and make this presentation. You know, it's important for us to have a fuller understanding of our history, and it's great that people are working to bring that to us. So thank you very much, Ursula. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, everybody. So.
Thank you so much for the education. I really appreciate it. And I know that you've been working on this for a while, and it's nice to hear the update on it. So thank you.
Historically, and that is part of justice, and this is not something that we want to have to remember, but we have to remember this is important in order to move forward. So I'm really happy to hear that this project is happening, and I'm happy to hear that we do have a commissioner on that historical piece. I think that, or the committee, I think that, I'm not sure how the commission feels about the city being involved in that committee, but I think it's something to consider for sure.
Well, thanks very much for all your work on it. you know, it's a real tendency for people to just pick out the happy, shiny parts of history and overlook the nasty ones and even consequences that have happened. So I'm really glad that this is going to be commemorated, and I look forward to seeing it in the future.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much. So this was just to receive the presentation at this time, okay? Okay.
Were you making a request that we join the coalition?
An official.
Or is that to come later?
Yes, we made a request. but
Okay, so,
Didn't necessarily expect you to do it.
well, I mean,
Yeah,
I
can't-
think we
yeah.
need to get that on an agenda. I mean, that would
Okay.
be a follow-up. Okay.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 3. We'll let these folks get out of the room. And we're going to receive an update from Russ Johnson, LMH Health.
I will, my purpose today is really just to
Hold on a
provide good
second.
communication. Oh, I'll wait. That's a good thing.
Yeah, let them get out for just.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. I'm Russ Johnson. I'm the CEO for the Lawrence Memorial Hospital, also known as LMH Health. And my purpose really is just to provide an update on the hospital. As you know, some people don't, but LMH is an instrumentality of the city and a charitable trust, and we have a close connection and an excellent relationship, I think, and it's your and our community hospital. So that's really my purpose. I'm going to favor keeping my comments a little shorter. You have a long agenda and more to go, in favor of questions if you have them for me. But I did want to touch base on a couple of things. You know, you've seen in the paper that this year is a financially challenging year for LMH Health, and that is a departure for us. We have had many years of stable, strong financial just security, I guess is what I would put it, and this year has been very challenging, and we are dealing with that, and I want to update you just a little bit on that. First of all, you know, in the hospital business, it's a little odd because when people are really healthy and the flu season is light, you're not sure how to feel about that. But the truth is we've had about 1,600 fewer patient days and about 1,700 fewer emergency room visits, and that's a good thing for our community, and it's a significant impact from a revenue point of view. We've also seen a precipitous decline in reimbursement, primarily from our major commercial payer, Blue Cross, where we have seen almost a 25% decline in reimbursement over the last 2 years, and that's 60% of our commercial business. So that's a very real impact, and it is not unusual in our industry, but it's unusual in our community. And so it's a little bit of, I think, shape of things to come, and it's something we're adjusting to. Our own health plan has been a remarkably stable health plan. Probably most businesses would be envious. In the last 5 years, we haven't had a single year with more than 2 or 3% increase in our premium. That's pretty unusual. And this year, we are $5 million over projections in our health plan alone. Partially that's because we have more people on the plan, but mostly it's, you know, the risk of a health plan cycle, and we are feeling that. And so we're doing a lot of work in this arena to make sure your community hospital stays strong. Over the last 2 years, we have recruited and added about 22 physicians into this community from all kinds of specialties. And we are beginning to see those practices really add to the availability of care in our community, with wait times in a variety of areas going down. And I think that's a good long-term thing, but it's part of an investment in this community. And I think I will shift that to sort of what is our picture of the future for LMH Health, and what are the things that we're thinking about and focusing on. This afternoon, several of you, and thank you, were at the opening for our East Heights Family Health. That was a genesis of our board that said we really need to encourage primary care availability across our community. As you know, we have several primary care practices, and this is our first one in East Lawrence, and we're very proud of that collaboration with Independence, Inc. You also know we have a sizable investment out west. That project, our West Campus, is on target for both budget and for occupancy. We anticipate that being occupied in about August of next year, with opening for service probably in mid-September. There's a lot of services going into that campus, many of which are already in place and in space that we currently lease. So this will be moving services to a place that we own. A number of things that are occupying us right now is what I would call the changing role of hospitals. You know, hospitals used to be really essentially places where talented people and amazing physicians and nurses and clinicians and technology and facilities were all gathered together in a place. And that place was the hospital, and if you were sick or injured or pregnant or became ill, then you came to us and we spring into action and do our very best to administer excellent care and compassion. And that's still really important. But we have to be more than an organization that sits in waiting. And when you look at the composition of health in a community, we heard earlier today, one of the comments was about this notion of social determinants of health. And when you look at the health of a community, you quickly realize that the role of hospitals and clinicians is frankly a modest part of that. 25% maybe of health. And so much of it is determined by other social determinants. It's not our job to address all those things, but it's our job to be a good partner in those things. And if you've noticed, in our literature recently, we've changed our statement of purpose to this idea of a partner for lifelong health. And I think one of the areas where this has been most evident is our collaboration around mental health and addiction, where I think for the first time in many, many years, that entire community, that agency community, is coming together jointly and collaboratively and really talking openly about how do we solve this enormous issue in front of us. We're putting a lot of work into that in partnership with our colleagues at Bert Nash and DECA and Heartland and frankly in housing. We're working with that coalition to address what is a growing issue in our country. You know, for the first time, I think since the flu epidemic of around 1917, life expectancy in our country went down for the last 2 years. And that's not from cardiac disease, that's not from oncology, it's not from infectious disease, that's from suicide and addiction. And as a community, we want to be a full, and as a community leader, we want to be a full and active partner in that arena. And I think that's just an example of how your community hospital needs to thoughtfully consider an expanded role. We can't do everything. and boil the ocean, and healthcare is bigger than any one instance, but it's an important example to us, as is investments in, for example, East Heights Clinic, making primary care more available, using services to improve access and convenience to what we're doing. But the very nature of what it means to be a hospital in a community is changing, and we are seeking to adapt to that change. It is a very challenging environment, but frankly, Lawrence is a fabulous community, and in my 3 years here, it has been absolutely a privilege to lead this hospital and to become a part of the fabric of this community, and we will just keep doing our very best to ensure that your community hospital remains strong, is addressing issues of health equity and population health, while at the same time doing our forte of intensive acute medicine that saves lives every day. So on behalf of my board, our 1,700 employees and our 170 physicians or so, we're very proud to be a part of this work in this community and grateful for the support and encouragement that we get from you all. So that was really my intended remarks. I'm happy to take questions, and I know those were super nice remarks, but if you have a hardball question you need to ask, I'm here for that too.
Thank you, Russ. Any
Of course.
questions or for Russ?
No, just thank you, Russ. Really appreciate it and look forward to continuing the success that you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we will open it up for public comment at this time. Any public comment on this item? Okay. Thank you very much.
I had something. I was waiting until after public comment.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to say I really appreciate all that the hospital has done and that you've done for the hospital, especially in terms of all of the ambitious kind of building projects that you have going on, and I'm really excited to see those and the success of those. And definitely with the mental health kind of collaboration that has happened over the past few years. It seems like not that long ago, but 4.5 years ago, that when I was first getting elected, I was involved a little bit in some of those kind of collaborations. And it's really nice to just see what's happened over the past 4 years and see everything really kind of start to come together. So thank you very much for all of that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So we received the report, and we'll move on to our next item, which is consider authorizing the city manager to execute it. Nope.
4.
Sorry about
You
that.
stole Jeremy's thunder.
Boy, I keep doing that.
He's off the hook.
I did that last time. So we'll receive a follow-up report on the 2018 audit management letter.
My mic. It is now.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. Excuse me. My purpose tonight is essentially twofold. I want to give a follow-up response to some of the audit findings that were presented a little earlier this year. And then secondly, I'd like to present the third quarter financial report that our staff has put together for your consideration. As you know, one of the strategic initiatives for the city is to improve our presentation of financial information, and so our staff got together and really tried to think about at a high level, what's some information we think the public could find useful that they'd be able to find in OpenGov, but maybe presented a little differently to provide, a ongoing conversation, if you will, about city finances rather than only looking at it during the budget and during the audit. But before I get to that, as you all know, when the audit was presented, there were several findings. And at that time, you had asked that staff, present an update of what's been going on. Just for a little background, before I got here back in 2018, the Finance Department actually put out an RFP, a request for proposal, to look into auditing services To my knowledge, that's the first time that had occurred in quite some time. So it was very good in terms of following best practices and generally accepted accounting principles to get a fresh set of eyes on our financial books, if you will. So the city sent out that RFP, and as you all know, RSM was selected, and they began that audit. For those of you who aren't intimately familiar with government finance, it's very technical in nature, as are most things. And the first year audit with a new audit firm is really a exploration, if you will, for both sides. So there's a very deep dive into the organization, into the operations, into the policies and procedures, so that the auditors can get a appreciation for internal control for areas where we may need support, where we may need help, where we may need to make adjustments to the way we currently handle our operations. And so some of those findings that they came back to you all with, the first one was that the number of audit adjustments that were required, they believed to be a material weakness. And again, just for a little background information, anytime an auditor has a finding, generally accounting standards require that we provide a corrective action plan. And so that was presented to you all at the time the audit was presented. Tonight, I just want to provide a little update. So I'm not really going to regurgitate everything that we went through prior, unless you would like me to. But I would just say that in the corrective action plan, we essentially saw that not having a month-end process in place was really what I would consider to be the crux of most of our issues in terms of financial reporting. So we had committed during the corrective action plan to get that in place, and I'm happy to say that staff has been doing that for several months now. With our new month-end closing procedure in place, we've been able to accurately record financial transactions within 10 days of the end of the month, getting all transfers where they're supposed to go, getting all the internal service expenditures where they're supposed to go, which I think has really helped with the user departments and knowing where they stand month to month in a more timely manner. Part of that month-end process is why I'm here tonight, to show you where we are at the third quarter, because we have a good handle on all of the different aspects of the financial report, and we're going to share that in just a little bit. The next finding actually involved cash. As you all recall, it had been quite some time since the city had actually accurately adjusted its cash balance. We have also undertaken that, and since June we've been reconciling our cash back to the bank statement. We still do have a variance from month to month, of course, but we're watching that variance roll out in the next month's activities. So as of today, in my opinion, there are no concerns about where our cash report is in our general ledger versus where the cash stands with the bank. Oh, sorry. Let's see. The next one really involved capital assets, and again, I think it was due to the lack of not having a month-end process. Now that we have that month-end process, we're able to determine in a much more time-efficient manner those capital assets that haven't been properly recorded, and we're addressing it throughout the year rather than waiting till year-end. I think that's really all I had in terms of the corrective action plan. Unless there's any questions that you all have, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions?
With that, I will go into the the third quarter financial report. So as I mentioned before, I think the city stopped producing a quarterly financial report a while back when the city implemented OpenGov, which hopefully you all have had a chance to peruse. It's a really robust system. It provides everyone the opportunity to really dive into our books and see where we are at a glance. But in talking with the staff, we really felt it was important, even though we have OpenGov and it's available to everybody, to maybe peel that onion in a different way and look at the finances at a 30,000-foot level, that you obviously could do on OpenGov if you wanted as well, but perhaps providing a different level of understanding to provide context to where the city is in relation to finances. And so what we had talked about doing was more of a balanced scorecard approach, if you will. So we started to think about, what is the type of information we think the public and you all would be most interested in. The city has over 30 funds. Some of them have really small amounts in them. They're required by law. We didn't really think that it was a good use of your time to sort of regurgitate OpenGov, so we really wanted to drill it down, and the value we went with was any fund that has an appropriation, an amount of money that you authorized for expenditure of $500,000 or higher. And that covers about 90% of our budget. So the report you're going to see tonight is sort of taking that microscope and honing in on about 90% of our budget. And so those indicators that we're going to look at are revenues, expenses, of course. We're also going to touch on the reserve policy, debt management, and investments. And taking that scorecard approach, what we wanted to do was sort of give a contextual view of revenue, comparing it to last year. And so we took the methodology that if our revenue in 2019, from January through September, was within 2% of our revenue in 2018, that would be a positive outlook. That doesn't necessarily mean that will always be positive, but just from this perspective, it would be a positive outlook. If it's within 2 to 5%, that would be an area that we need to monitor, but we're not necessarily all that concerned about. And if it's greater than 5%, that's certainly something we need to look into, investigate, and make sure we understand why. And so with that in mind, those key revenues from January through September in 2019 were just around $1 million higher than they were the year before. And so the next several slides is looking at those key revenues and then giving that status update. As you can see, property taxes, sales taxes, use taxes are all higher than they were in the prior year, which is a good thing. The use tax is certainly where the growth is in the city right now. Sales tax is less than 1% higher than the prior year. And then the franchise fees, the electric franchise is a little bit lower than last year. Natural gas is a little bit lower. Communications is a little bit higher than last year. Some of the state taxes that we get, the gasoline tax, the transient guest tax, the liquor tax, are all within that margin of acceptability. Water sewer fees are a little bit lower than they were in the previous year. Solid waste is also a little bit lower, and roll-off fees are a little bit higher. They're in the acceptable range. And finally, stormwater fees are just slightly higher than the prior year, and the amount of money that Douglas County reimburses the city for EMS services is higher than the prior year. That, of course, has a lot more to do with timing than it does actual revenue growth, which some of these do as well. So we wanted to provide just a little bit of an analysis on those revenues. With the electric franchise fee, I'm sure you all are aware that Westar merged with KCP&L. They've got a new group called Evergy. Through that merger process, the KCC, the Kansas Corporate Commission, required that they provide a rebate back to their rate holders, so that lowered the franchise payment in the first quarter of 2019. So when you compare 2019 to 2018, it's about $171,000, or a little bit more than 4% off. On the natural gas, we're off about $24,000, or just over 3%. We believe this is primarily due to just a more mild weather that we've seen in terms of natural gas. And then due to the wet spring, we believe that's the main reason why water and sewer fees are off by $1.3 million, or a little less than 4%. So next, what we wanted to do is look at just the general fund, and this will be all revenues in the general fund, whether they're in that major category or not, and compare the budget to where we are as of September 30th. I think the hard part is anytime you look at a chart like this and you say, well, we're 3/4 of the way through the year, so we should be roughly 75% of our revenue. We should have roughly 25% left. The real difficulty is like property tax, those payments happen 3 times a year, so it's not going to match that pattern. Sales taxes are the closest to matching that pattern, as you can see, franchise fees as well. But what we're trying to do is just provide context. So in the general fund, you can see that we've collected $62.2 million. We have about $15.4 million remaining for the fourth quarter. We're at just under 80% collected, so we have about 20% of the budget remaining. When we compare that to all the major funds, I don't know if it's all going to fit on the sheet. Zoom it down just a little bit here. Hopefully you can read that. The general fund's at the top, and then we just put these funds in order by highest appropriation to lowest. Water and sewer, you can see, has about 36%. So if everything were cyclical, they'd be a little bit under budget, which you saw on that last slide, that they're about 4% off their budget right now. But we just want to provide context of all the major funds, where we are compared to budget. And you can see citywide, we're right at 24.1%, 16%, excuse me, of budget remaining. Looking then at the expenditures, we considered any expenditure comparing 18 to 19 within 2% to be a positive, anything 2 to 5% to be something we need to be mindful of in terms of growth, and then anything greater than 5% to be something we really need to understand. And so when we compare expenses, January through September of 2019 with the prior year, expenses are about $2.4 million, or a little under 2% higher. And as we go through the scorecard, personnel is within 1% of the prior year. Contractual services is about 7% higher than the prior year. And I just wanted to throw into context that, again, it's higher, but it was within budget, so it's not what we would consider to be a concern. Commodities are about 5% lower right now. Capital debt's about 5% lower with the prior year, but that's because we had debt that rolled off, so it's within budget. And then the transfers are actually higher, and that's simply because in 2019, those capital transfers that were added to the 2019 budget have already occurred, whereas in 2018, it didn't occur until the end of the year. So it's more of a timing issue. And this slide here is, again, looking at expenditures the same way we looked at revenues. Contractual services are higher than the prior year, and that was due to assistance for the Humane Society that was in the 2019 budget but wasn't in the 2018 budget. The transfers I had just explained previously. And so then, again, I think the notion is we're 3/4 of the way through the year. We should have roughly 25% of our budget left. So we put that in here just so that, as we go through this, continuing on quarter by quarter, we'll have that benchmark there. But looking at the general fund, you can see what was budgeted and where the expenditures are and how much of that budget is remaining. The Office of the City Manager is a good example about risk management and when the insurance payments are due. So that's not a every month transaction. That's a couple times a year. Same with, I believe it's the Parks Department. They traditionally have the majority of their expenses in the fourth quarter. With the MSO, what I noticed was that we have a lot of contracts that are signed for street maintenance, but we haven't, as of September 30th, hadn't had a lot of expenses yet. So some of this is timing. Again, we're just trying to provide context of where the general fund is. We're just over 34% budget remaining at the end of the third quarter. When you roll that out to all funds, the only one I really wanted to highlight was the water and sewer fund at 50%. This is because their debt service, principal debt service payments not due until November, and it's about $16 million. So if that had already occurred, they'd be closer to 20% remaining rather than 50%. So again, we just wanted to provide this for you all, just for some context as to where our major funds stand at September 30th, we're at about 38% citywide budget remaining. So the next section of the report was to look at the reserve policy, and currently the only policy we have is in the general fund. That policy is that unrestricted fund balance would be 25% of the following year's expenditure budget. So looking at that strictly, at 12/31, the general fund was about 31%, so it was higher than that policy. As you all know, we had requested, you all approved amending the 2019 budget to increase the transfers to bring that back down. And so this next slide is basically just indicating that when those two transfers were made, we're now at about 26.7%. So we believe we're within target of the policy. This slide here is looking at just that revenue piece by fund compared to that expenditure piece by fund. So you can see year to date, have the funds exceeded revenues over expenses, or is it under? You can see really the only large fund that's spent more money than it's brought in, if you will, is the Solid Waste Non-Bonded Construction Fund. That's because in 2019 we moved that back just into the Solid Waste Fund. So the revenues are being recorded in solid waste. We just had to transfer out the residual balance. Other than that, what you'll see with the outside agency and the special gas is that some of the expenses have already occurred, but the reimbursements will be coming later in the year. And the next indicator is our debt management. There's basically two ratios that we wanted to consider that are both considered by Moody's and S&P. One is the ratio of budgeted debt service expenditures to your total expenses. Ours is 12%. Moody's considers anything less than 15% to be favorable. And then our ratio of direct general obligation debt to the appraised valuation of the city. Ours is 1.46%, and both organizations consider that to be very manageable, meaning that the amount of debt that the city currently has incurred is not an overwhelming burden to the tax base.
Jeremy, on that slide.
Mm-hmm.
The second ratio is only on geo debt. Is the first ratio all debt? Or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the geo debt is based to appraised valuation because that's what pays for it. So the revenue bonds are paid by user fees. And this slide just goes into a little bit more explanation. And finally, the city's investment portfolio. We essentially have two parameters here as well that we're considering. One is that our investments stay within the policy, and two, that our rate of return follows the 90-day Treasury bill. As you can see, we're just slightly under the 90-day Treasury bill. Part of what makes investments in Kansas a little bit more restrictive is a state law that says that banks are the first line of investment opportunity. And so essentially, if the bank will sell you a CD that's at this 90-day Treasury, that's what we have to buy. So there's some exemptions to that rule for capital funds, but the capital funds aren't the largest part of our portfolio. The general operations are. So as you'll see on the next slide, we just don't have a lot of opportunity to invest. We've currently got about $226 million invested. About 50% of that is in CDs. So we're doing the best we can with the restrictions we have. The remainder of that is invested in either Treasury notes, Treasury bills, agencies, or things that have a little bit better yield to market ratio. But overall, the portfolio is just a little over 2%, and the Treasury yield is 1.75, so we are beating the yield just slightly. This was our value as of September 30th, 2019, about $48 million higher than the prior year. The majority of that are the bonds that were issued in 2019. And this last slide is just looking at the portfolio. As I said, 49% are CDs, 31% are called agencies. This is essentially Fannie Freddie that's bought on the open market, and then treasuries, either notes or bills, with cash being about 6%. So the question that we had for you all was, one, do you find this information helpful? Are there other things that you would like to see on a quarterly basis? We'd really like to standardize a report so that we can show the same information consistently. But we want to make sure that what we provide is meaningful and helpful. So I will turn it over to you all. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions? Nope. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, we'll open it for public comment now. Any public comment on this item? Okay, bring it back up here.
Thanks
So
for the details.
Yeah, I really appreciate the report, Jeremy, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some time with it and see if there's something else that I think I'd like to know about. So hopefully I'll be able to have a discussion with you on that. And I appreciate the update on the audit report. So thank you so much for providing that.
Thank you. Okay, we're on to item number 5 now. Consider authorizing the city manager to execute an engineering services agreement in the amount of $577,480 with Drake Wells for preliminary design services.
Mayor and Commissioners, Dave Wagner, Director of the MSO. I promised Andy, who's the project manager on this, I'd kind of frame it out a little bit since I've been working here for just about ready to start my 5th decade. So I've been around the facilities a little bit, and I'd encourage everybody to come out and take a look. I know the commissioners faced a lot of difficulties, I think, with where we are with our facilities and our infrastructure. It certainly is good news that we're proceeding with an update to the facilities for the police, but we still have a lot of work to do in that area. I think in my 4 decades here, sometime in the 1980s, there was a relatively large project done, and not large by any standard today, but we built in the back of the Kansas River water treatment plant a 3-bay garage that housed the sanitary sewer collection group. That was a group of about 12 people. Today, that houses at least 40. So, and it's really the last infrastructure thing that I can recall that we've done for field facilities. I wanted to talk just real briefly about deferral, because you hear us talk about deferral of maintenance a lot. And so then we have projects, we have to overcome both that deferral and then meet the current needs so we don't fall further behind. In the case of facilities, we've also, at this point, deferred capacity. So as the city's grown, we've not reacted to the capacity needs, and we've also not taken on, as functionality has changed, believe it or not, the way we do the work when I started here in 1980 isn't the same we do it today. The equipment's different, the infrastructure's different that we use. We've got computers, believe it or not. I remember the first one of those in 1986. So it's changed the way we do work, but we haven't really made significant investments or modification to our existing facilities. So one of the things I promised Andy would do, because if you look through his side presentation, he has a sticker shock value that the long-term capital investment that we think might be needed, still have to refine that, all the caveats of this is just a budget number on a long-term capital investment is somewhere between $50 and $60 million in facility needs. Again, we'll need to refine that, and that's the part of the work of this study, is to get a good plan moving forward. I will say, as long as I've been here, we've never had an integrated plan for facilities that would include parks and rec needs, MSO needs, or former public works and utilities. And I think that's, with your strategic plan and idea of innovative infrastructure and dealing with infrastructure and meeting the needs, this will set the stage for really a long-term plan and a long-term effort to get us where we need to be with facilities. Just a real quick couple of things of note besides what I just mentioned. The 1976 central maintenance garage was built when the fleet was about 250 units, and it's 3 times that today, and it's functionally unchanged since that was built. I think also just of note, Down in the solid waste division and in the field divisions, those facilities are located not only in the floodplain, but in the floodway. And those operations include underground fuel storage tanks that are in the floodway, salt operations. I knew that would get you, Lisa. I can see you just going, oh my gosh. But I think that's some of that functionality needs. We know that's not the way to do it now. And that's not a good situation for resiliency. And we've got 160 people coming out of that 11th Street area providing critical services in the times of flood. I can say it this year, only one employee lost their car at a flood event that was totaled, but he was happy to get rid of the old family van anyway. But I wanted to frame it a little bit. It is a long-term project. It's one that's way overdue, at least in my mind, but there's a lot of drivers for that. And you've supported it so far, and hopefully we'll define a little bit. With that, I think I'll let Andy take over and give you some of the details. So.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Andy Enns with the MSO Department. Dave took most of my presentation there, but no. So I'll just be presenting an update on some of the work we've been doing since we issued the request for proposals back in May. Just jump right in here. So a little background. Way back 2.5 years ago, Brandon was up here presenting to the commission on some of the existing facility challenges we have. And since that time, we've put a lot of work into this, choosing a site selection team, going through various sites, issuing the request for proposals back in May, and then going through that RFP process to where we are today. So for funding, in 2019 through 2023 CIP, we had $7.16 million in 2019 and 20 from the Utilities Fund. In the 20 through 24 CIP, we have $10.64 million in 21 funded from the Solid Waste and Stormwater funds. And then future CIP funding will be based on estimates from that we determined from this preliminary design. And like Dave said, the total project capital costs could be $50 to $60 million. Real preliminary estimate there. We would also have operation and maintenance costs that we would have to factor into that as well. So a little bit about the existing facilities. We have 20 maintenance-oriented facilities. Some of the issues with those are employee safety, the decentralized locations, just insufficient space for the growth that we've seen in the departments, a lack of security, the floodplain and floodway concerns, and with that, environmental concerns and the deferred maintenance. I'm going to go ahead and show some photos here of some of the highlights, I guess, of the lack of some of the problems we're seeing here. This is a central maintenance garage, and you can see the fire truck and the ambulance, and there's no room to work between those. The solid waste trucks are right up against each other there. It's just too small for the amount of work that those crews have to do. The wastewater filled shop. This is the morning, typical morning. This is after vehicles have already left as well. You can just see that there's not a lot of room for the parking. There's limited interior space, and some of our more expensive vehicles are parked in there. Streets and solid waste. Again, this is all in floodplain and floodway. Some of the issues here are spreaders are hung up on chains. There's a ladder made out of wood there. Just some things that really need to be updated. The tree line just back behind there is the creek that's in the floodway there. This is one of the garages there at Streets and Solid Waste. It's a little hard to see, but this strap here is basically holding up this wall. It's not a structurally designed strap, but it's doing its job for now. The photo here is from one of the August rains, and this is actually the floodwater receding from the site. These are the brine tanks here. Again, that's the spreader station there. And so we've got it pointed to the arrow on here, and the darker red here is all floodway. Most of the buildings from that site are in the floodway. The fueling station is right down in here, and then central maintenance across the street is in the floodplain, which, I started looking at city code and said, well, what kind of restrictions do we have there? And it was easier to just say that we don't meet any of the code, really. Not actually, but I started to list off the things that we didn't meet, and then it just would have taken up too much space. So new construction or improvements to the facilities are prohibited within the floodway. And then there are just a lot of requirements for the floodplain as well that are not being met. So
what
with
would
that,
happen then? I mean, given that updates to the facility are in a lot of ways out of question because of its location, what ultimately happens with that site given the underground tanks that we have? I mean, are we looking at a long-term, are we looking at an environmental remediation site?
I think that will be one of the things that the consultant team looks at is what are the possible uses for this site. Obviously, this is not going to be reused for anything probably other than a park or something like that. And so we would have to look at that point if it's going to, I assume there would be some remediation with that.
Yeah, usually when you close out a site like that, you're required to remove all the tanks and all the environmental issues, and then there'll be an investigation, and more than likely there'll be contamination found, and then there will be a remediation site.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much the standard steps.
We're used to remediation sites,
Yeah.
right? With farmland. So the new facility goals, consolidated campus that centralizes the staff and facilities, will optimize the use of those facilities, functions, and staff roles, addressing the storage and facility needs. And then we're going to have to probably use multiple funding sources through a multi-year phased approach.
Are those funding sources, are they written in stone as of now, or are they going to be, because I noticed that was part of the CIP, you guys had a write-up about that, and the funding sources seemed maybe a little off. I was a little concerned about those funding sources.
Well, yeah, I mean, really the only ones where we actually have the money at this point are the utility funds. 2021, we have scheduled for the stormwater and solid waste funds, but that'll have to be approved in next year's budget, where that's coming from. We'll have to factor that into the different rates, and then just see what other options there are for funding.
Okay. But just how those were divided up between the different funds. Some of them seem pretty heavy, and some of like the stormwater fund, it's like 28% of the costs were allocated to that.
Yeah, I think Lisa, once we define the needs, we'll certainly do a cost allocation of what the different funds' responsibilities are.
Okay.
And I think you'll see a pretty significantly revised CIP associated with the recommendations. So it will change the CIP, I'm sure. And then we'll try to figure out, well, how in the world are we going to do this reasonably? With the development of rate models for stormwater as well as solid waste, we'll be able to plug those in like we do on the water and wastewater side, and get those funds, understand their commitments and their needs on a cost-need basis, so we can get that into the rates appropriately. And then obviously on the general fund side, we'll have to come and talk about what are we going to do to get the general fund operations to pay their fair share of these things as well. So it'll be a heavy question for you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
But it'll be new.
So back in the May meeting, we talked about using this being our #1 site, the farmland remediation site. It's a large site, city-owned. It's got the potential benefit of being a remediation site that the city gets to use for something else. I don't know if there'd be a lot of private development wanting to take on that challenge. However, that is one of the challenges, is not knowing exactly what we need to be doing for that remediation. We're working with GHD. We should be getting a remediation report by the end of the year from them on what the alternatives are for remediation of the site. And then we'll have to work with KDHE to make sure that we move forward on that. So the RFP process, we contracted with Dr. Brian Lyons to use expertise-driven project delivery. He's been involved with the city on the police facility, the farmland remediation project, and the project management software project as well. So he was involved through this whole process. We issued the RFP for preliminary design services on June 5th. Received 6 proposals from consulting teams. We evaluated the teams based on qualifications, and the team names and the costs during initial evaluation were not known. 3 teams were selected for interviews, and we went through through the interview process. Based on the combined scoring, we selected Dake Wells consultant team for pre-award clarification. Dake Wells is an architecture firm from Kansas City. Dan is here from Dake Wells. CFS is their engineering and surveying firm from Lawrence, and Aaron is here from CFS. And then Ortel Architects is a municipal architecture firm from St. Paul, Minnesota. They specialize in these types of campuses. I did not ask Andrew to fly in for this meeting, but he will be here in town for public meetings, interviews with staff, and future commission meetings as well. So with the team, we've had 4 clarification meetings to negotiate the scope and fee that I attached with the memo here. Just going through the scope of work real quick. The first phase will be site discovery and assessment. We'll provide our mission statements, our org charts, staff and vehicle inventories. We'll provide all that to the team. From that, they'll do a departmental programming and interaction phase. They come to the sites and interview employees. They evaluate the sites and start to factor that into the space needs and site needs. Part of that will be to compare this proposed approach to a do-nothing approach, which is kind of what we've been doing. And so we'll compare that. We'll probably also look a little bit at what if there were separate facilities. I don't know that there's even space anywhere to do that, but the main thing is to compare this proposed approach to and the costs associated with that to not doing anything. We will also coordinate with GHD on the remediation alternative requirements, where that would be located on the site. And then from that, we'll have an initial test fits where we'll take the results of the departmental interviews and kind of what we need for spaces and start to fit those onto the site. Come up with several alternatives and have design charrettes from there to just evaluate what fits best and on that site. And at that point, verify that the farmland remediation site is adequate. After that, we'll have a conceptual design, which will basically be a master plan for the site that we can pull out a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, and say, okay, we've got this on the site. Now we need to, this is the next phase to do this. Evaluate the phasing of construction and field staff relocation, and then they'll present a final report and any value engineering at that time. Key deliverables, really the facility master plan is number one. And then from that, we'll get a phase 1. So the phase 1, whatever department, whatever facility is going to be out there first, we'll get a report specifically to that phase that'll be basically 100% schematic design. We'll also have the departmental operations questionnaires, programming summaries. We'll get narratives about the existing facilities, 11th and Haskell, the 4th and Mississippi Traffic Engineering Shop, and all the Swan Building, all the existing facilities, what we could potentially do with those. A traffic impact study, that'll be big for this site, for site circulation, but also where do the vehicles go, and what improvements are needed off of this site on 23rd Street or wherever that might be. We'll get a subsurface geotechnical exploration report with this, as well as a cost analysis for the Phase 1 facility, as well as the facility plan, the master plan. Presentations and meetings that are included in the scope, we'll have 3 presentations to the City Commission. We'll have 3 public engagement meetings to have public engagement and see what the public is interested in there, what their concerns are, and try and address those. We'll have 7 or so meetings with city staff, planning and development. We'll have a pre-application meeting with all the city staff to get their input from fire medical and everyone else with those meetings. And then, you know, we put the scope out with the RFP. We didn't put these options in here, but Dake Wells, the consultant team, brought these to us, said, hey, we think these are good value-added options that we can provide with this. Energy modeling, so we'll be looking at different materials and what impact that would have on energy usage of the facility. Daylight modeling, the windows, orientation of the buildings to improve daylight in the building. We'll have a sustainability workshop where we look at both building and site-related possibilities there to enhance sustainability, and then virtual reality tour of the concept plan. So we're talking this morning about how this aligns with the strategic plan. It addresses the deferred facility needs, like Dave mentioned. It's a future-oriented project to support community growth. We're going to be looking at 20, 30, 50 years down the road. Where's the city going to grow? What are some of the things we're going to be needing to do? And how is this site going to be able to handle those requirements? We're going to improve service efficiency and resiliency of our field crews. And again, the environmental stewardship, compliance, and sustainability by reusing this farmland site for this use. And then employee safety, well-being, and morale is a big thing too. When you're crammed into a site like the central maintenance garage, it's got to be tough to work on some of that equipment. So this should help with that as well. So the action requested tonight is to consider authorizing the city manager to execute the engineering services agreement in the amount of $577,480 with Dake Wells for this preliminary design. That
Thank you.
is all I have. If you have any questions.
Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much. Any public comment on this item?
Katie Walsh, early days, but I just want to remind you that this would qualify for the % for art. So be sure and include it. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you for that reminder, Katie. That's good. Any other public comment? Okay, bring it back. Thoughts?
Just want to know more about this wall that's being held up by a belt buckle. Moderately concerning. Yeah, yes?
It is.
Well, this is a very early phase of getting going on this long-term project that I think has been needed for quite some time, obviously. This does seem more like a study versus a design. Is that what I'm getting?
Well,
From
so
reading?
it's going to be basically a master plan document. The whole site schematic design, including infrastructure, will be basically 33% or so schematic design. I think that's right, Dan. The phase one facility, whatever we determine that to be, based on need, based on funding, will be at 100% schematic design. And then we would take that first phase, supplemental agreement at that point would have to be issued for the planning documents that are required. There's going to be rezoning. There will be, Jeff Crick had a whole list of things that we'll have to go through for that. And then going into the detailed design document.
So is this a not-to-exceed type contract?
Yes.
Not to exceed price?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions you have?
I think it's the commission doing what we said we were going to do,
Yeah,
which is exciting.
I guess in the city manager's report recently, the word infrastructure came up. And is this one of those things that you have gotten an understanding of in the time that you've been with us, Craig?
Well, it is, and it's a piece of it, and it's the support mechanisms and infrastructure. The other thing that I talked about was employees. It was the very last point on here, and I am, having toured only a few of the facilities, I do have concerns, I think. So those are pieces, that's the bigger piece of where we spend money is our employees. So we need to have great facilities and safe facilities and equipment so that they can do their work well. So there's all kinds of layers on top of this, in addition to the just bare bones infrastructure that has been underinvested in, I think, for a city this size for a long time. So yes, this is definitely something that I was referring to.
And I guess, before we do this, you have an opportunity to wave us off if you think that it's not good enough or, we need to reconsider before we do this. So.
Yes, and as I kind of mentioned when I was being briefed on this, especially when this was a bigger price tag than you had last heard, so that's always going to get my attention. We had a good conversation about it. But I'm a believer in using consultants when it exceeds either our capacity or our expertise. And since we haven't obviously done a design of a campus for this kind of facility ever here, it's good to bring in national experts that we do lots of these every year and show a good variety and scope of their capabilities to help us see what best practices look like, but also are there great ideas now that can keep us from doing it the way we might have decided to do it 10 years ago, and use what's going to be advanced and help us be conservative in making investments that also will pay off by being innovative and modern. So hopefully they'll save money for us in the end if we don't invest in things that are going to be obsolete soon.
Thank you. Appreciate that perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd make a motion then to authorize the city manager to execute an engineering service agreement in the amount of $577,480 with Dake Wells for preliminary design services for the field operations facility project CIP number UT 1884 and CIP number PW 18B7.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Nanda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
I was very excited about that. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Andy. Okay, we're on to item number 6, which is consider adopting resolution number 7305, authorizing the sale of general obligation temporary notes for several capital projects authorized in the CIP.
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. What you see before you are the projects, excuse me, that we've identified needing bond financing to get started. As we identified earlier this year, our new process is to ensure that all projects are funded by notes first, so that we know we have the actual cost of the project before we issue the permanent debt financing. So these are the projects that you have before you. These were all included in the 2019 and 2020 CIP and had previously been authorized for bond financing. The reason we need to come tonight is there's a certain process that we have to go through to get the bonds issued, and some of these projects need to get started in 2019 so that they can meet their deadline. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Jeremy? Oh, okay, thank you. Open it up for public comment. Any public comment on this item? Okay, bring it back to here. Any comments?
Move to adopt resolution number 7305.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Nanda, second by Commissioner Boley. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. On to item G, which is commission items. Any future agenda items to add? Nope. How about future work session items to add? Are there any other miscellaneous items for commission? Nope. Okay. We're on to the city manager's report.
I don't have anything special to highlight in that report, but happy to answer any questions.
I have something to highlight, and that is the energy performance contract, the one-year measurement on the, I think, $11 million investment we made a couple years ago on our energy efficiency program. The results came back on our first year, and we saved $551,864 in energy savings due to these improvements that we have made in the past couple years. So I think that's very significant. And I haven't read the whole report, but I believe they've even indicated to us how much of our carbon footprint we saved from it. So I just think that's fascinating, and it's great to see that finally paying off for us. That's good. So, thank you. That was it. Anything else on that? Any public comment on the city manager's report? All right, then we'll move on to calendars.
I had a question about the December 3rd City Commission meeting. So we'll be swearing in the new commissioners Tuesday night. And what's the expectation of the outgoing commissioners on that night?
Well, the current commissioners there, it expires on the 3rd. So typically in the past, we would start the meeting with this group.
With the 5 of us seated like
Right,
this?
exactly. And then we go through, I mean, this is how we've done it the last couple of election cycles. And then we have consent, and then we start with the state of the city address. So the mayor would give that at the beginning. Then we have, if there's any recognitions, consent, public comment, and then our first regular agenda item is the swearing in.
Okay.
Actually, the first regular agenda item is the mayor, and then those outgoing commissioners give comment if they so choose.
Okay.
And then we do the swearing in and swap. And then the new commissioners and the mayor, if the mayor and the new commissioners want to make statements, then we do that. And then we do the election of the mayor and the vice mayor. And then I guess we do that. Once we swap, we do the election, then comments. I mean, these are just kind of general. And then we have our break.
Okay. So basically, the 5 of us will, or a majority of us will need to be up here until regular agenda item 1, basically.
If you so choose, yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think in the
I just wanna
past,
make sure I'm clear on
sometimes
it.
outgoing commissioners did not choose to come, but technically you're here through December 3rd.
You're clocked in.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's varied slightly on that, but
That sounds
the
fun to me.
general
I've
idea.
only witnessed one firsthand, so it's good to know what's coming up. Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Anything on the calendar? We have our downtown master plan visioning workshop tomorrow night, so I'm really looking forward to that, to attending that. See where we're at with that. Anything else on the calendar we need to add?
Our next, not to add, but just to point out that our next meeting on November 5th starts at 5 p.m.
Yes, thank you for the reminder. Anything else? All right.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Ananda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor.